So you are a developer looking for Spring Boot? Good choice. Whether you are just hearing about it or trying to figure out why you should even bother, let me tell you, Spring Boot is like the cool cousin in the Spring framework. It swoops in, make your life easier, and helps you develop those snazzy web applications faster than you can say Java. In this video, I'll break down some of the biggest advantages of Spring Boot and explain why you should consider using it for your next project. Don't worry, I will throw in some examples to make everything crystal clear. Grab a coffee, kick back, and let's dive in. 7 reasons why you should use Spring Boot. Convention over configuration. You know how annoying it can be to set up an application, right? All that boilerplate code, XML configuration, and file setup can be a massive headache. Spring Boot gets rid of most of that hassle. The magic lies in its convention over configuration philosophy. What does this mean? Essentially, Spring Boot has some reasonable defaults out of the box, so you don't have to configure every little thing to get started. You can focus on writing code instead of messing around with setup. Example, let's say you are building a simple REST API. With traditional Spring, you have to set up things like dependencies, application context, servlet configuration, and a bunch of other stuff. But with Spring Boot, just add few dependencies and it's ready to roll. Here is a quick example of how easy it is to spin up a basic REST API using Spring Boot. In less than 10 lines of code, you have a working REST API. And guess what? No extra XML configurations, no web XML files, nothing. Just pure simplicity. Embedded servers. No more deployment. If you've ever had to deploy a Java application, you probably remember the pain of setting up an external web server like Tomcat or Jetty, packaging your work file, and then deploying it. It can be time-consuming and frustrating, especially when things don't work as expected. With Spring Boot, you get embedded servers. It comes with an embedded Tomcat or Jetty or Undertow, depending on your choice. So you don't need to worry about deploying to an external server. Your application runs like a regular Java program, and boom, it's up. Example, you can run your Spring Boot application by simply typing this command in the terminal. mvn spring boot :run. No need to configure a separate Tomcat instance, create a work file, or deploy it somewhere else. It runs on its own, which is perfect for deploying and testing environments. Microservices made easy. Microservices are all the rage these days, and for good reason. They allow you to break down your monolithic applications into smaller, more manageable pieces that are easier to develop, deploy, and scale. But implementing microservices can be tricky without the right tool. Here is where Spring Boot shines. It's built with microservices in mind and paired with Spring Cloud. It makes building microservices architecture a breeze. You can easily integrate distributed systems, service discovery, circuit breakers, and more. Example, imagine you want to create a small microservice that handles user authentication. With Spring Boot, you can create this service as a standalone application with minimal effort. You can also easily connect it to other servers through a service registry like Eureka. Spring Cloud handles this. And set up load balancing with Ribbon. It's basically the Netflix of microservice architectures. And I mean that literally. Netflix uses Spring Boot and Spring Cloud in their infrastructure. Auto configuration. Less code, more productivity. Auto configuration is one of those features that sounds almost too good to be true. Spring Boot analyzes the class path, configuration, and beans in the application and automatically sets up the environment. That means you don't need to write as much code to configure dependencies like databases, message services, or security. It's not just about saving time, It's also about reducing errors. The less manual configuration you have to deal with, the lower your chances of messing something up. Example, let's say you want to connect your application to a MySQL database. In a traditional setup, you have to manually configure a data source bean, set up connection properties, and deal with JDBC configurations. But with Spring Boot, you just add your database dependencies, throw your connection details in the application.properties file, and you are good to go. Spring Boot will auto-configure everything for you. Spring Boot starter dependencies. If you are like me, you've spent a lot of time hunting down the right versions of libraries and managing dependency conflicts. That's where Spring Boot starters come in. Starters are pre-configured dependency packages that bundle commonly used libraries for you. There are starters for almost everything: web development, testing, security, databases, you name it. Instead of manually adding dependencies, you just include the relevant starter in your POM XML or build Gradle, and Spring Boot handles the rest. Example, let's say you want to build a web app. Instead of adding a bunch of individual dependencies, you can just use Spring Boot Starter Web and it pull in all the necessary dependencies like Spring MVC, Jackson, and Tomcat. And boom, your app is ready to handle HTTP requests. Spring Boot Actuator, monitoring and management. As your application grows, so does the need to monitor and manage it. Spring Boot Actuator provides built-in features for health checks, metrics, and monitoring. With just a few configurations, you can expose endpoints that give you detailed insights into your app health, memory usage, CPU load, and more. Example, you can enable the actuator by adding the following dependency. Once it's set up, you can hit /actuator/health in your browser, and it will show you the status of your application, letting you know if everything is running smoothly. A great community and ecosystem. Last but not least, Spring Boot has an active and vibrant community. It's part of the broader Spring ecosystem, which means there are tons of supports, tutorials, and resources available online. And because it's so popular, new features, library, and integrations are constantly being deployed. If you run into any issues, chances are someone has already solved them and written about them on Stack Overflow or the Spring forums. Final thought. So to sum it up, Spring Boot simplifies the development process by taking care of all the heavy lifting. Whether you are building microservices, REST APIs, or even full-stack applications, Spring Boot helps you get started quickly and efficiently. With its auto-configuration, embedded servers, and simplified dependency management, you will spend less time setting up and more time writing code. So why use Spring Boot? Because it takes care of all the boilerplate code, configuration headaches, and deployment nightmares. So you can focus on what really matters, building awesome applications. Now, go ahead and give it a try. If you are excited about diving deeper into the world of modern software engineering from architecture to cloud and security, check out my video courses where I explore these concepts further and tackle real-world challenges. The link to the courses is in the video description below. See you next time.